I really enjoyed going into a recording session and not knowing what I was going to be asked to do, not knowing anything about the music, and having it put in front of me and challenging myself to read it right and play it right and come up with something cool right away. I kind of prided myself in that, because that's what I thought what made the difference, pardon the phrase, between the men and the boys, or the, ladies and the girls, to come in and really kind of throw down right away, when you got in there and do something that was not only the right thing, but could, like, when you left the session, they go, yeah, man, Tim came in and he nailed it,
Welcome to episode 99 of the Bass Shed podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. What's up, folks? All right, I'm going to try this little bit on the front part of the show this time. If you are a first-time listener of the podcast, please hit subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to it on. You can also stop by thebasshed.com/podcast and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a comment, leave a rating, maybe leave a comment about leaving a rating, maybe even rate your own comment. You could type in the comment, 5 stars. We're all probably musicians here. You can get creative with it. All right, on the episode is electric bassist Tim Landers. Tim Landers is a session player, spending some time on the New York session scene and working as a session player here in Los Angeles. Tim has a ridiculous resume. He's worked with jazz fusion artists such as LD Meola, Billy Cobham, and Gil Evans. Tim has also worked with Tracy Chapman, Tori Amos, Ritenour and Dave Grusin. In addition to all that, if that wasn't super impressive enough, in addition to all that, Tim has made incredible contributions to bass guitar design. He was on the ground floor with the Pedulla Buzz bass and the Peavey Dyna Bass, as well as his signature series, the Peavey TL-5 and TL-6. Obviously, TL stands for Tim Landers. It's an absolute treat to have him on the podcast. I heard Tim a few weeks ago at the Baked Potato here in Los Angeles. That night, he was performing with 2 fantastic guitar players that were co-leading the night. The guitar players were Alan Hines and Brad Rabuchin. Brad and I had done some playing over the years, and I hadn't seen him since the world kind of opened back up. So it was great to hang with him and hear him play. On drums that night was Chris Wabich. And for regular listeners of the podcast, you might remember Wabich from episode 41 of the Bass Shed podcast. He's also the drummer on my record, actually. Which, all right, as a tangent, speaking of Wabich, right, that's the thing I do. I do 2 things. I speak of Wabich and I go on tangents. So, the update on my album. I just got the tracks back from the first round of recalls on the mix. I can't remember where I was when the mix engineer sent it to me, but I pulled it up on some legit monitors when I got home. Obviously, listening to it on just earbuds from the phone wasn't going to cut it. I can do better than that. I had a couple things to say and I sent it back. The mixer got me over another version the next day. I sent that to Wabich, actually, to get his ears on it too. I'm happy to report that the album is even closer to completion. Again, the album is titled Smile, after the Charlie Chaplin tune, and I'm stoked that it's nearing the finish line, and I will keep you updated on that and more information on it all very, very soon. That will be a good day. I'm finally, when it's out, when it's just out. All right, and now, speaking more about speaking more. I don't think this tangent is related to Wabich at all, but it probably should be. I feel like I should rope Wabich into this somehow. Speaking of things getting closer, the launch party for the Bass Shed Academy is getting closer. Actually, I just got all the documents back in the mail the other day from the California Secretary of State saying that I'm legit. So, thanks for the validation, Secretary of State. I'll take what I can get. They also sent me this book of things you should know when starting a nonprofit. So I started reading through that. It is pretty overwhelming, like all this stuff related to starting the nonprofit, and that was my evening. Was reading through this book, and how to construct the bylaws while having the football game on in the background. Yeah, I'm a football fan. That's a thing. I'm a Denver Broncos fan, actually. And while I'd like to say it was disappointing watching the Broncos lose again, for anybody that's following the NFL season this year, I wasn't shocked. And it's getting to a point where I'm not even disappointed anymore when the Broncos lose. I'm kind of just expecting it. Those fellas cannot seem to close in the red zone. You know what I mean? Like, they just can't make it happen. I don't know how many tangents deep I am at this point. But the Basshed Academy launch party is coming up. You can check that out at thebasshed.com/academy. The folks and I at Lemur are tightening all that up. We're tightening up the launch party on January 7th and the programs and policies in general for all of it. For the lessons program there, not the launch party. There's no real policy for the launch party. But definitely make sure to stop by lemurmusic.com for everything you need for the double bass. Check out their sheet music, the bass accessories, the basses, etc. Etc. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off at lemurmusic.com. All right. I think the tangents have concluded. the tangent segment of the show has come to an end. I was talking about Tim Landers at the Baked Potato. I had a wonderful time listening to Tim play and listening to his decisions. You know, that's how I listen to bass players. Is obviously, I don't know. There's no percentage to really qualify, but most bass players are technically capable of more than they're playing at any time. And so, you know, really getting into why they're making this musical decision and what is it in the music that's impacting what they are playing. That's always really exciting to me, and listening to it with those ears, listening to Tim play with those ears, and just checking out his decisions all night was wonderful. He was making fantastic musical decisions, and really just laying down such a strong foundation for two guitar players that had a lot to say. They were dropping a lot of stuff harmonically and rhythmically. These two guitar players were really being creative on top, and Tim was just crushing it. The mark of a true bass player and a true pro. It was really inspiring. It was great to have him on the podcast, and here it is. Here's my talk with session bass player and jazz fusion bass player Tim Landers. Tim?
Hey, Ryan. How you doing, man?
Doing well. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good.
Yeah.
What are you up to today?
Oh, yeah, real exciting stuff. Yeah.
Like going to the DMV or something?
Well, it's close. I mean, I brought a car in to have a mechanic look at it because I need a brake job in one of my cars. So
okay, that
was exciting. I went to the gym.
Nice.
It was exciting. And I'm going to do a bike ride after this, so no playing today.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Do you just like stay on the streets riding the bike, or do you get up into the hills and the mountains?
Yeah, so I live up close to Mulholland and Topanga.
Okay.
You know, out in the West Valley.
Yeah.
And I do a little bit of off-road stuff, so I have like a little mild mountain biking.
Nice.
You know, nothing really crazy.
Yeah.
And I like biking. I have a road bike, and I have like a hybrid bike I do for just chores and stuff. And then I have a gravel bike I just got, which is kind of fun.
Okay.
But I haven't really been able to find like gravel specific paths around here. But
right.
Yeah, it's fun, man.
That's cool, man.
Good way to get outside.
Yeah, right. Get some exercise, get some sunshine.
Exactly. Yeah.
Those are all good things. So you're going to go to the gym and do the ride?
I already went to the gym.
Okay, that's an active day.
Well, I went to the gym to work on with some weights because I, get any weight training on the bike. And I just came off this tour, like just a couple of weeks ago, and I was sitting on a bus for 6 weeks.
Oh, right. Just everything's.
So my routine was like, like my jeans weren't fitting, I'm like, I'm okay, man, I got to get back out there, get back into my thing. I had a pretty cool, regimen going on beforehand where every morning, for like the last couple of years, like since the pandemic, and, doing a regular exercise routine, a lot of biking. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, on the road, I couldn't do any of it.
Right.
The occasional like hotel gym,
Sure.
but our schedule was so crazy that even if I had time in the morning to go to the gym, I'd just be so wiped out.
Yeah.
That I didn't have the energy to put a real workout in,
Right. Who was the tour?
So I was out with Billy Cobham.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
You've been working with him for a while.
Yeah, off and on,
Yeah.
I met Billy in January of 1980.
Okay.
So, which was kind of a funny story in itself, but and then I worked with him for a few years from that point, and then I left his band right when I moved to LA.
Okay.
I was living in New York at the time. So, and while I was working with Billy, I was also doing other things, and I was starting to do record dates, in New York, and then I started doing record dates out in California. So, the drummer Vinny Colaiuta was getting me on these records, and I would do the same for him. I would get him on records I was doing in New York.
Okay.
So every time I came to LA, it'd be like, hey man, it's cool out here. I mean, I'd been out here a few times, but I was living in New York City, Midtown, had a good area, but my apartment was just a typical New York apartment, a small place with a bunch of bars on the windows. And I'd come to LA, and Vinny had picked me up. And at one time, just before I moved here, he had an old Austin Healey 3000, really cool vintage car. And, he picked me up at the airport with that, and we went back to his house, and he had just bought a house, in the valley. He had a nice ranch house with a pool and a garage. And I was just going, looking at this going, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
And I go back to New York, and I have my little dingy apartment, and I'm like, yeah, so on top of that, I had people encouraging me to come out here. If you come out here, man, you'll work, you'll do this, you do that. And, so I finally said, okay, I'm going to take the leap,
And that was 1980?
84.
Okay.
The beginning of 84. I don't actually, it started in 83, but I think officially I moved here in March of 84. That's when I got my first apartment. Because I kind of lived at Vinny's house for a while.
Was it true? Did you get plugged in pretty quick? And did you get into the scene here pretty?
Interestingly, I thought, coming from New York and who I've been playing with, because I'd been playing not only with Billy, but with, LD Meola and Lenny White and the Brecker Brothers and Gil Evans Orchestra and I was doing all kinds of stuff and some pop dates and stuff. And I thought, well, I'll just come to LA and they're going to love me. I'm going to just this. and what I discovered was that there was a little bit more loyalty out here. The whole session scene was different than New York in the sense that in New York, if you come into town and you're like the new young gun, and you're like really happening, the producer's going to start to hire you, and bands are going to start to pick you up because they want the latest, greatest, newest thing.
Sure.
In LA, there was a little bit more of you kind of work your way up to that.
Okay. And then find your own guys that will call you regularly and cultivate your little crew.
Yeah. I mean, so the people that were doing most of the record dates had been established. And there was a reason why they were doing it, which is another part of the story too, was it was a different approach to working in the studio. Mm-hmm. Out here in LA, people had brought their own gear, for instance, to sessions. Whereas in New York, you just brought your axe and you played with whatever they had at the studio.
Okay. But you were bringing your own amp and your whole rig?
So in LA, everybody was showing up with they had cartage services, and you'd go to the date and so would, be Dan Huff on guitar or Landau or somebody like that. And they'd have their Bradshaw rack and Bradshaw pedals and their tall racks with all this stuff. This is in the early 80s, so everyone had all this gear. They brought sessions.
All this rack spaces.
Guitar players had all their boutique. Guitar players had their boutique amp heads and the Bogners and the Dumbles and they've got a Marshall kind of cabinet, or they had a Fender cabinet or whatever they had. So there's all this stuff, Whereas in New York, man, a guitar player would show up to a session and plug into the Twin that kind of half worked. And that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And
to slap it on the side a couple times to get it to come together.
And the other thing that was different too is in New York, you really hoped the engineer would kind of try to get a decent sound for you because they didn't have time to screw around with anything. And out in LA, the engineers kind of really counted on you giving them a great sound right out of your system.
Right.
Like, for instance, these elaborate, rack systems and multiple amp things that guys like Dean Parks and, George, what's his last name? Come to me in a second. They had these guys had their sounds. They gave like a stereo feed to the engineer, and they had everything happening already.
Yeah.
Their crunchy sound, their little bit of reverb, whatever it was, a little delay, a little chorusing, is all coming out of their own racks, right? Mm-hmm. In New York, it was like, hey man, can you give me a little chorus on this? And the engineer goes, okay, maybe, yeah, maybe.
Which one did you prefer? Did you like relinquishing control to the engineer, or did you like being in the mix?
I liked, coming out here, I liked the ability to be able to kind of, mold my sound a little bit,
Yeah.
Because in New York, it depended on who was actually recording you, and what they did with it afterward, like, really had a lot to do with what you ultimately sounded like.
Sure. Do you feel like you were misrepresented on some of those New York dates?
Yeah, maybe not misrepresented, but I mean, I was sometimes disappointed, with the sound that eventually came out. I mean, Marcus Miller was already doing dates, and he was young then. So he was still about 18 or 19 or so, but he had his thing down. He already had his Stars Guitars preamp in his jazz bass, And so he was already giving a preamplified sound to the engineers, and everybody loved it, but we couldn't figure out exactly what he was doing just yet.
Okay.
I mean, there were people like Ken Smith started his basses around that time too, and he had a prototype bass that he kind of sent around New York, and all the players got a chance to play it, for a few days or a week or something, and that bass had on board. I don't know if you've ever heard of the original Ken Smith bass, but it had like all this gold hardware, and underneath the plate on the bass was not just EQ and a preamp, but it also had like, I think it had it definitely had an envelope filter on it, and it might have had some kind of chorus or flanging on it. Yeah, so built in. So it was kind of like, it's like it had a lot of stuff on it, but everybody loved that bass, not just for that, but also the way it played. But it was a beginning of bass players having a little bit of control.
Was that a response to because Ken Smith was a New York manufacturer?
It was a response to that. Yeah.
To the session thing.
Because people wanted to be able to, like, bass players wanted to be able to get something a little bit different than the jazz bass or a P bass sound, going through a B15. Right. Which was kind of like the thing, when all the bass players in New York that were doing all the dates then, people like, Will Lee and Gordon Edwards and Anthony too, to a certain degree. I'm probably forgetting half a dozen guys, but Chuck Rainey, they were playing P basses mostly,
sure.
Jazz basses and stuff, and they were just going direct into the board, and it was what it was. Of course, their playing is what made everything happen.
Right.
But, when Anthony started doing stuff like he was doing with the sounds he was getting, and Marcus started doing what he was doing, getting the sounds he was getting. So Marcus with his, kind of now trademark kind of scooped, slap thing. And Anthony with his super clean, sometimes with a pick, bright kind of thing, he was doing. That wasn't a P bass going through a B15.
Right.
It was something else,
Right.
So when I came to tie this together, when I came to LA, suddenly I had more leeway to be able to like start to mold my sound a little bit. And that's when I started getting into the sonics of what I was playing. Mm-hmm. And this kind of also led itself to when I started designing my bass signature series for a couple of manufacturers. Kind of came from me learning all these things as I was going through the session thing in LA. And putting my own rig together. I was watching other bass players, and I'd go see, Nathan East, or go see Jimmy Johnson or Neil Steubenhaus, or, and see what they were playing through and what they brought to dates, recording sessions. And I started to kind of, with the limited budget I had, try to put stuff together.
Sure. What were some of those initial items that you were, when you're building out your rig?
Yeah. Well, the first thing was like, bass players were starting to use like modular system, a preamp and a power amp,
Mm-hmm.
and then like some kind of custom speaker configuration where either it was built by somebody or it was, before any of those amps were out, like the SWRs and then Epiphany, or these kind of modular things with a two-way with a tweeter.
Yeah.
People started building those things themselves or having them made.
Okay.
So you would have like a Furman or an Alembic preamp,
Mm-hmm.
with like a Yamaha power amp and like a two-way cabinet.
Okay.
Now you could give that to the sound engineer, and you could customize your sound a little bit with the EQ that was on on your preamp. Like the Furman preamp was known for its parametric EQ, so you could get just about any kind of tone you wanted out of it.
Yeah,
and that was cool. That was new,
right?
To be able to do that instead of just going direct out of your bass, out of your basically out of a Fender, which had volume controls and a tone attenuator,
a master volume or two if it's a jazz bass, and then a master tone, right?
Yeah. So now you had a lot more control over your sound, and you could be a little bit more creative sonically.
Mm-hmm.
I really dug that. Yeah. So to answer your question 10 minutes ago, it's like coming from the New York thing and then coming to LA, where there was a lot more, acceptance of this kind of, rig to bring to a date. Because in New York, again, there was time restraints, and there was also logistical restraints. In New York, the studios are all in the city, all up in, the 3rd, 8th floor of a building. There's not, unless you used SIR, you didn't really have cartage service. You couldn't really lug all this crap into a date. They didn't give you time to set your stuff up, and they was just say you just come in, man. It's like a jingle date, especially, or like a pop date. You just come in and plug in, and you just start playing.
Yeah. What kind of information would you get on these sessions when you just walk in and they're kind of cranking them out? Were you getting lead sheets or chord charts or chord rhythm charts?
Yeah. That varied a lot, but most of the time, let's say in New York, it was definitely a lot of times they had an arranger. Let's say it was a jingle date, and everything would be, on paper.
Okay.
A lot of times for those things, it could be just a simple chord chart.
Okay.
But sometimes it'd be a specific line written, but definitely there was reading involved.
Yeah.
And all the recording dates that I did, whenever they were what I would call like industrial dates, if they were like television or film,
sure,
or jingles, work.
Yeah.
That stuff was always like, in and out. You're reading from the get go, and the better you had to be a good reader. But of course, doing record dates when you're working with an artist, that was a completely different thing.
There's more creative input, right?
That's when you're working out, parts.
Sure.
You're actually being part of the creative process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems a lot more fulfilling.
It is. But at the same time, I really enjoyed going into a going into a recording session, not knowing what I was going to be asked to do, not knowing anything about the music, and having it put in front of me and challenging myself to read it right and play it right and come up with something cool right away. I kind of prided myself in that, because that's what I thought what made the difference between, pardon the phrase, between the men and the boys, or the, ladies and the girls, to come in and really kind of throw down right away, when you got in there and do something that was not only the right thing, but could, like, when you left the session, they go, yeah, man, Tim came in and he nailed it, And so that even though it wasn't as creative as a record date, the industrial stuff too was kind of part fun for me in the challenge aspect of it.
Yeah. Was being a session musician kind of the dream from when you had started playing and started getting into being a professional?
Yeah.
That was more so than like being in a band or a famous rock band, but playing the sessions was always the thing.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that question, because that is exactly what my thing was when I was a young guy, when I was in high school, and I would buy records. I would always read the back covers and read the liner notes, and I wanted to see who was on this session. Yeah. So when I picked up a Loggins and Messina record, or I picked up a Steely Dan record, or a Carole King record, or whatever,
Man, who did play on the Loggins and Messina stuff?
Well, that was West Coast usually, so that was probably like Keltner or Russ Kunkel on drums, or probably Bob Glob or Joe Osborne, or somebody like that, on those record dates. And
I've never looked at those ones actually.
And Chuck Rainey eventually, because Chuck came out to LA,
Yeah.
But there was some people that you would see these same names over and over again, and you would start to recognize something about their playing. You know what I mean? Like there would be something about them. Even bass players who, like I said, like those days where everybody was playing either a P bass or a jazz bass and going direct, it was kind of hard to like hear the difference between one bass player and the other sonically, but you could tell by what they were playing, note wise, and sonically too, because everyone's hands sound different. But it was a little bit harder to discern, But I really loved this whole concept of being a session musician.
Yeah,
I thought that was the coolest thing.
Sure.
And so I kind of I had this idea in my head, man, I want to be one of those guys,
Yeah.
I mean, I had no business thinking this, but I did anyway. I went for it. I grew up in Brockton, Massachusetts. I used to like to call the home of the work boot. And it's like nothing. It was a blue collar town, and but I started gigging. I started working in Boston. I finally got my way to New York, and I was, little by little, I was coming up the ladder,
Was that a difficult scene to kind of break into? Is the New York session scene?
Very much so. Yeah. I never really broke the barrier. At least I don't think I did. I mean, I did some stuff, but that was another reason why I came to LA too, is because there were just a handful of guys that were doing just about everything in New York.
Yeah.
And they had been there for a long time, and most of them are native New Yorkers. So, they were kind of in already, just by nature. Some of them were like their dads were in the business, you know what I mean? Like, so there was already kind of an in, and there wasn't as much work as far as, volume as there was in LA. And I knew coming to LA, I found out, man, there's a lot more stuff going on out here. Now I'm talking, of course, this is early 80s, right? But it was, a lot of people were doing records out here. A lot of the films most of them were being done out here. Most of the TV shows were being done out here.
And TV commercials and all that. And
commercials and stuff. Yeah. And so there were, as you know, there's studios everywhere, especially, in Hollywood and North Hollywood and Burbank.
Yeah.
And Santa Monica, some of them. And so there was a lot of work. So if I thought, well, shoot, man, I can see if I can get in on this, I think I had a better chance, to do that than I did in New York.
Yeah.
Because I tried. I was in New York for about 6.5 years. Granted, I did a lot of live stuff, because I was working with Meola for like 3 years, and then with Billy for another 3 years, and then a bunch of stuff around all that. But those were pretty, full-time gigs, most of them, because a lot of them were long tours. And even though I did a record with Al, I did his Splendido Hotel record in the studio, but and then with Billy, I did a bunch of records, but most of his stuff was just, Billy was a different kind of artist. He would record a lot of live stuff, and then once in a while we do a studio thing. What was I saying? But I wasn't quite getting all the pop dates and the jingle dates and things like that I wanted to get in New York.
Okay.
It wasn't the frequency wasn't enough. I didn't think.
Yeah.
And when, like I mentioned earlier, when I started coming out to LA and I would be invited on these record dates, I started seeing not just the way that the musicians were doing these records, but how much work there was. There was a guy named there is a guy named John Pena, who at the time I didn't know, but
amazing bass player.
Yeah, and John was doing all these dates, and he was working all the time. And I'm going, what is this guy doing? And I found out these stories that they would tell. He would go to a party and something, and he was on so many records that somebody would put on. He'd go through the record collection and go, "Oh, I'm on this," and then he'd toss it across the room. And go, "I'm on this one," and he'd toss it across the room, or something like that. I don't know if that's a true story, but it sounded cool to me.
Absolutely.
So, but I'm like, man, that guy's working on so many records, he can throw them across the room. Well, man, I want to. So coming out to LA, was the right thing to do. And as soon as I got out here, I found out, like I said, there's a little bit more loyalty, and so there was a little bit of proving ground still.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, I would do live stuff, like played like the Big Potato and other clubs, and I started getting a lot of people coming out to see me, and that also helped me get work.
Yeah.
I realized also that there was another level of musicianship out here in LA that I didn't really appreciate until I moved here.
Okay.
What I mean by that is, in New York, there's always this attitude, it's like, man, everything's happening here,
Yeah.
and out in the West Coast, man, those guys are cool, but they're not nearly as hip as we are.
Right.
And which is completely false,
Mm-hmm.
but that was the attitude. And when I came out here, there was a different level of professionalism, especially when it came into the recording studios that I didn't see in New York. And that ability to come in and just play the most perfect part with the greatest sound and do it over and over again and and make hit records, that was the thing I saw happening out here that I didn't see to that degree in New York. Of course, it happened in New York and there were people that did that. But in general, it was more of a kind of a slap together kind of a thing. A lot of the dates that I did that didn't really seem to be that way in LA. In LA, there was a lot of time put into the records. I'm talking about making, pop records. Yeah. You would go in and they would spend an whole afternoon, getting a drum sound.
Right.
They would never do that in New York. No way. It was just way too expensive.
I'm regularly captivated about how geography impacts music. And so do you think that connection right there of things taking a little longer to develop here has to do with just the LA relaxed thing?
Probably.
I mean, everybody's here is just moves a little slower.
Yeah, probably.
Man, we'll get to it. Come over here and hang, get some coffee. We'll talk about it.
Think about all these artists that would go, yeah, man, we're going to put the band, we're going to go and do our record. We're going to LA to do our record. That was a thing, Right. We're going to go to LA. I'm going to chill, man. We're going to go to Caribou. We're going to go whatever these, so that's in Colorado, but we're going to go to one of these kind of studios where, I remember they would go to
studios. Yeah.
Yeah. Where they go to go to the record plant. And we were going to be parked at the record plant for a month,
Right.
Or whatever,
Yeah.
So yeah, but like I said, as far as the session guys are concerned, I really admired how well people played, how they interpreted music, and so perfectly, especially in the pop vein. You watch these guitar players like Landau or Tim Pierce or Dan Huff or Lukather or somebody like that who could just, come up with the perfect guitar parts, and not only one part, but have 2 or 3 parts in mind,
right.
Have a whole arrangement in their head, how to do this. And, it was different. It was a different, approach to playing. And for bass players, it was, okay, man, I'm going to come up with the coolest, part that totally supports, the song and the singer and the artist, but also has its own kind of coolness factor,
Mm-hmm.
and something that might, give you a little, get a little attention, drawn to it. I mean, right. not that was the attention, not that you should be doing that so much, but you couldn't help but try to put your own little flavor on something,
Sure. Get a little line that has some movement to it that, someone recognizes.
I mean, there were people also at that time that were doing things like not just Marcus and Anthony, but even like Pino Palladino, who was taking his kind of rock take on Jocko and putting, his fretless thing on these records when he did the Paul Young stuff. And,
those are great records.
I mean, he was you walked away from that record date going, he did some interesting stuff, even to this day. You go, wow, man, that was pretty bold what he was doing.
How much creativity would a producer give you on that? Were they looking for let me hear your part, or just play through it a bunch of times and kind of work one out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there were some producers that were known to be really open to you trying things,
Yeah.
And of course that always, it depended on a lot of factors, but if it was a big record and it was a big record budget and there was time to experiment,
mm-hmm.
Then of course those sessions lent themselves more to, you being able to, work out some things and try some different things.
Right.
I mean, there's a producer named Joe Ciccarelli who I worked a lot with. back then we were doing, for instance, a Tori Amos record. And man, I played so much stuff on that. Like there's like a fretless solo in one tune. I'm like, listen to it now. I go, man, I can't believe that they let me do this, right? But there it is, And so yeah, some producers, they were more open to it. Other ones would be like kind of the more typical, like, no, man, let's just cut this. I just want it straight ahead and make this a record. No, but a lot of times they'd say, okay, make this a hit.
Yeah.
I want this to sound like a record, they'd say.
Right.
And sometimes you would just do the thing, they go, dun, 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 but that's the right thing,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked that too. I admired the people that could make that work, like doing the thing that's almost predictable, but it just for some reason, it's
still the best choice.
Still kills it.
Yeah.
So, so this, and I admired like John Pena and Steubenhaus, who was my teacher when I went to Berkeley, because I actually met him when I was in high school. I grew up in the Boston area, like I think I mentioned. Maybe I didn't. Yeah, I did. And Neil was going to Berkeley, and he was friends with Steve Smith, the drummer. And
okay.
I was complaining to Steve that I wanted, study with someone, because I was self-taught up to that point. I had taken guitar lessons as a younger person, but I'd never taken a bass lesson with anybody. I was already playing for a couple of years. Anyway, he said, you should study with my friend Neil, man. He's like, he's given lessons. He's a cool guy. And so
he's one of the most recorded bass players.
Yeah, right,
of all
eventually,
time.
yeah. So at this time, he was still a Berkeley student, right?
Okay.
So I called him up. And I said, hey, Neil, I got your name from Steve, and I'm looking to find a teacher. And he says, yeah, cool, man. Come on up. Bring up your bass, and we'll get together, and I'll listen to you, and we'll see where you're at, and we'll go from there. Cool.
Yeah.
So I went, up to have my first lesson with Neil. I brought my basses. I had two.
Mm-hmm.
I had a Rickenbacker 4001,
okay,
a black one, a jet glow one with a checkerboard inlay. It was a beautiful bass because I was really into Chris Squire. And then I had a fretless Precision, which was the fretless that they first made, like in 1974 or something. And I just got that,
Was that is that the Fender fretless P?
It was
like
a Fender,
with the maple neck.
Yeah, it was a rosewood neck.
Okay.
Just a plain, no mark, no lines, so nothing neck.
Remember when they did that with the maple neck? Those basses are so hard to find, but I thought they looked so cool.
That's hard. Yeah, those are hard to find.
Yeah.
So I brought those two basses. I came in and I played for Neil, and he says, okay, cool. And the first thing he says to me, he goes, first of all, you got to get yourself a real bass, pointing to the Rickenbacker, and then looks at the fretless and he goes, and you're not ready for that. So
shots fired.
Shots
fired.
I'm like, ouch. But he couldn't have been more right. Because he said I should get a jazz bass. That's something you can use in any situation that works in any kind of thing. You can play jazz bass anywhere.
Yeah.
And a Rickenbacker, as it's got a thing, it's got a sound, and like not good for everything.
Sure.
So,
I'm surprised he suggested a jazz over a P.
Yeah, he did, because he thought because of the two pickups, he thought because you can
More
make
versatile.
a jazz bass sound like a P bass a little bit,
Sure.
But you can't make a P bass sound like a jazz bass.
That's correct. Yeah.
And that was his favorite thing. That's what he played.
Okay.
So I went. I found an old '63. In those days it was like $250 or something.
Oh man.
Yeah, but it had been refinished. It was okay. It was. But I brought it to the next lesson. He goes, "This is perfect," and we started going from there.
Cool.
But the reason why I bring up Neil is because, as you said, he eventually became one of the more recorded bass players out here in LA.
Yeah.
And his whole approach to recording and studio etiquette and everything was what I really modeled myself after, because he was a mentor to me. When I was when I studied with him, and I also studied with him in the first semester I went to Berkeley. And I learned a lot from Neil. I mean, he was an amazing teacher. Unfortunately, he didn't go on teaching. He didn't teach anymore after that, as far as I know. But so I was very lucky to be one of his students.
Yeah.
And anyway, he just had a knack for teaching, and he just taught me the coolest stuff and the most applicable stuff. Things that you could use on the gig and use in sessions and stuff.
Sure.
So when I came to LA, I would always call Neil. Neil was like the kind of guy you would call and ask for anything. You needed to know anything, especially if you're new out here. Hey, Neil, I need to get a washer and dryer. I go, oh yeah, you go to LA-tronics, on like
Neil Steubenhouse, the original Angie's List.
Yeah,
is that what it is?
Talk to Tony, Neil knew everybody and everything. So when I started doing dates, and he would recommend me for stuff, and which was really cool.
Yeah.
So I started kind of like just paying attention. I even went to a couple sessions that he did. Remember, I went to a couple of TV dates that he was on, and he let me come with him, and I just sat behind him, and I watched him do the date, and I watched them. It was with an orchestra, and when there's like 30 cues, and each one they'd come up and they'd look at it, and the conductor would count it off, and they'd play through it, and they'd take it. And they'd move on to the next one. I remember thinking, wow, man, this is kind of high pressure, Yeah. But because there's 60 other musicians in the room,
Sure. Yeah, you can't be the one that has to do another take, right? You couldn't get it.
You have to be good at that. So I learned, I kind of knew that, but seeing it in action really prepared me for the first time I got called to do a legitimate date like that.
Okay.
And so that was a good thing for me to kind of know what I'm up against and know how to prepare. I was always a good reader, but reading and reading under pressure are two different things.
Yeah. How did you initially, when you started going out on some of these dates, how were you handling the pressure? Was it a lot, or were you able to keep cool and just trust that you could get through it?
I was pretty confident about my reading and my ability to interpret. Although there were a couple of early sessions where I was sweating bullets.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, partly, not one time there was somebody playing a joke on me, and another time it was just super hard music.
Okay. Yeah. What was the joke? Someone put some unreadable piece of music on the stand?
It was one of those classic, I remember it was an Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV show. This is probably 1985 or something. And I remember Tommy Tedesco was on the date.
Okay.
And Steve Diskin, I think the drummer, I can't remember who else was on it. And what they did, though, they took this like ridiculously hard piece of music. It was like some kind of cello piece. Yeah. And they stamped, like 2M6 on it, like real 2, second cue, 6Q. And they stuffed it in my folder. So I get to the date, and I'm just sitting there and I'm just kind of thumbing through the music, like you always do. And I come across this one piece, and it's like the old, fly shit on toilet paper. Like, what the heck is this? And like, I take it out and I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, it's really hard. It's like an alto clef, there's like 7/2 phrases. Like, what the heck? So, and those guys, they're like just cracking up.
Yeah.
Behind me. They didn't let me know until the first break. So for the first hour, I kept going looking at that piece.
Everybody tried to count through a couple bars.
It said solo on it. I'm like, wow, man. Yeah. I think it was an Al Silvestri date. It was something like that. One of the big composers too. And the contractor, a woman named Sandy DeCrescent, she was the one you wanted to work for because she booked all the dates, So, yeah. Anyway.
Well, what were some of the most, out of all the sessions you've done, what were some of the most memorable? For any reason, because it was, maybe because of the artist, or maybe because there was some weird left turns that happened on the session, or.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I have really good fond memories of doing like one of the first movie dates I did, and I was featured on some fretless things. On that was a movie called Mystic Pizza. I think it was Julia Roberts' first movie.
Okay.
And that was, I got a chance to play a little bit on it, and it was a good movie, and it was really popular, and it kind of helped me get other dates. But I remember just being pretty satisfied about the way that came out.
Yeah.
I think also one of the first big record dates I did was for a guy named Robert Tepper, and he recorded a song called No Easy Way Out. I did his whole record, but the one tune from this record that ended up being his hit was on the Rocky IV soundtrack.
Oh, okay.
And that also was a really fun date because of how I got on it was he was from New York and he'd come out to LA to do the record, and they were going through bass players. Like he had already gone through about 5 or 6 players of the LA guys, and he didn't like any of them. And so the producer found out about me, called me and said, hey, we're looking for a bass player for this record date, blah, blah, blah. And so I came in there knowing this guy was from New York, and, I'm from the East Coast and I lived in New York. I came in and I lowered my bass strap a little bit, I took out my pick, I rented an SVT.
Okay.
I just kind of really rocked out,
Yeah.
And he said, that's it, man. That's it. That's the guy, man.
You sold him on it. Yeah.
And so that's how I got on that record date. But it was also a really good record date. It had Myron Grombacher on drums, who was from Pat Benatar's band, and Alan Pasqua on keys.
Sure.
Who told me, he said, Tim, don't tell anybody about your jazz gigs, man. They don't want to hear about it. He was talking about doing like rock and pop records. So don't tell them you do that because, they'll think you can't play rock.
Right.
And Dan Huff on guitar and another guitar player. I can't remember, but it was at Soundcastle Studios. And I remember one day they took so long getting a snare sound, and we were playing. I somehow managed to get like a triple scale rate. We're playing basketball out in the back while they're getting drum sounds, and while I'm making all this money. And I thought, man, this is the life.
This is it. I did it.
Yeah. So that was memorable for that, just the kind of the absurdity of it in a way, and also the fact that it was a big hit on that too. And every time that movie's on, it's like it reminds me of that record date.
Yeah, how many times has that happened? Where when syndicated television was not streaming based, and you just come across like an old movie, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember playing on that.
Yeah, it happens every once in a while. Just recently, that movie, it's an old movie called Midnight Run with Charles Grodin and Robert De Niro. And there's there's lots of bass on that one. I can't remember if it was a Danny Elfman thing or something, but, it was myself and an upright player. And, the cues were so cool, and it just, that's a good one for movie
I'm
dates.
looking that up right now. 1988.
88, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
a couple years after the Mystic Pizza. That was 86.
86, okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I think the session was in 85,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And
who did the music here? Music by, oh no, that's
who wrote the music for Midnight Run?
Not up right now.
I can't remember. I was David Hughes did Mystic Pizza. I remember now.
I can't. I'm not that savvy with. This is right now just showing me "Come Fly with Me," and then obviously like Jimmy Van Heusen and
Oh yeah, no. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I can't off the top of my head. I thought it might have been Sylvester. No, it could have been Danny Elfman. I did do one of Danny's first movies, but I can't remember which one it was.
Oh really?
Yeah. He was just delving into movie writing. But, record dates wise, I have a good funny story about a Tracy Chapman record. They had me play upright on it. And it was her second record called Crossroads.
Okay.
And so I came into the date and they wanted me to play, like I said, upright. So they set me up in this room.
It is Danny Elfman, by the way. I found
okay, cool.
Yeah, you were correct.
So in this room, they had me set up the upright was also where I think it was a Chihuahua. She had a small dog that she took everywhere with her. And the dog was in the room, in the little like ISO booth with me.
Yeah.
With my upright, and like with the Neumanns and everything.
Yeah,
and So I'm saying to the engineer, like, hey, should we maybe have the dog move? Because I kept thinking, like, if the dog yaps or moves or anything, it's going to be picked up. Those mics are pretty loud.
Sure.
And he goes, no, Tracy, he says, you can't move the dog. So you just, if he makes the noise, you just have to redo the take. I'm like, okay. I get it now.
Yeah.
So.
Dog wins.
So the dog wins. So like a couple of times during some of these tunes, you hear a little bit of a rustling around or something. Right, Tim, we have to punch you in, and like in the second chorus. Another really good record that I really really like, which I don't know how popular it is or isn't. It was Stan Ridgway. who was in the band, I think Wall of Voodoo. He did a solo record called Mosquitoes, and it was the coolest record. And I got to play upright on it and fretless and fretted bass, and I got to be creative, And I really, like, to this day, I can listen to that record. I really enjoy it,
Okay.
Yeah, those are fun sessions.
When in your playing did you pick up upright?
High school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pretty early on.
So, how I started playing bass was because I was playing guitar, and when I was a freshman in high school, I should also say that my dad, who's no longer with us, but he played bass, kind of semi-professionally, we used to call it. He had gigs on the weekend,
Okay.
He had picked up bass later in life. He played other instruments, but he picked up bass when he was in his, probably, late 30s or something. And he had all kinds of gigs. He played with this Johnny Cash kind of tribute band, and he played with a jazz group and some other things, some big band thing, I think. And so he was playing, and he had a bass. And my high school started a jazz band that when I freshman year, and the guitar chair was already taken by a senior. Like, I was a freshman, like I said, and so my best friend, who was the drummer and in the jazz band, said, "Tim, you should audition for the bass chair," because they still haven't found anybody yet. So I asked my dad if I could borrow his bass, and I stayed up all night learning to read F clef.
Yeah.
And I went the next day and I auditioned for it, and I got the gig. I got the chair. Yeah.
Nice.
So I started playing bass for my high school jazz band, and I started really liking it.
Yeah.
But in order to be in the jazz band, you also, this is at Brockton High School, you also had to be in the concert band and the orchestra and the marching band.
Right. Oh, and the marching band.
Yeah, because they thought that they looked at jazz band, I was like, that's a treat.
Yeah.
So, and in order to recruit more people to play, some of the instruments that nobody wants to play, they made that requirement. So I ended up playing tuba.
Okay.
And euphonium.
Okay.
And the other bands. And then I played upright or bass violin in the orchestra.
Yeah. Okay.
So they taught me, like, the head of the department there was a bass teacher, and he taught me a little bit about, not a bass teacher, he was a tuba player, but he taught me, how they all have to know how to play a little bit of every instrument, right?
Yeah.
So he taught me, just the basics on, fingering and like how to hold a bow.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of sawed my way through,
right.
these things. But I learned a lot, and I started playing a little bit more, upright in the jazz band here and there. And that's another reason why I bought that Fender fretless when they came out, because I thought I could get that tone from the upright without having to lug the upright around. Because that was the thing I didn't like, was having to carry that thing everywhere. But that's when I started.
Seems a little treacherous on the East Coast.
Yeah. Huh. But I did finally buy an upright. I mean, I bought a K, when they were pretty good bass. And I started doing gigs here and there, but I didn't really latch onto upright, full bore, because this is like late 70s, when fusion was starting to really be, the thing. And
that's an interesting time for acoustic jazz.
Yeah, exactly. So upright was suddenly becoming a little less hip, and, electric bass, and because of people like Stanley Clark,
Sure.
was becoming more hip, and so I didn't really play a lot of upright. Just, there wasn't a lot of call for it.
Sure.
Yeah. So it wasn't until I came, out to LA, really, that I started playing it again. And the reason why I did that is because in order to do like movie dates and stuff, you had to be able to double an upright.
Right.
Yeah. So I had to go back to school, basically, and kind of
dust it off,
hone up my chops a little bit. Yeah. So I bought a nice bass, a pretty nice bass, which I still have. And I started becoming more of a doubler, I'm still an electric player, but I play, enough upright to get in trouble.
Yeah. But what's it been like? Like you came here and got involved with it, with the exception of like old Hollywood recording dates. When you moved here and started doing a lot of these sessions, that was kind of a heyday for session players in general. Recording technology at this point is, more advanced. dudes were making, and women, musicians were making a living just being studio players.
Right.
What's it been like to watch this new trend in culture with home recording and everybody's got a studio and no one goes to the studio or hires specific session players unless it's an A-list date, A-list record or something like that?
Well, that's a great question, and I tell you, there's such a long answer to it, but I try to be succinct in just the sense like it changed everything, right?
Yeah,
it just changed everything.
Yeah,
for good and for bad.
Sure.
Obviously, the ability for people to have multi-track recording at their disposal in their own home was a huge, huge thing. Because prior to that, if you didn't have a lot of money, you couldn't put together a home studio with a 24-inch tape machine and a mixing console and everything else that goes with that. Including isolation booths and soundproofing and all the cabling and outboard gear. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to put a studio together. So unless you're a multimillionaire, you didn't have a studio. Right. So there's that. That's where we're coming from. And so what that enabled for, like you said, where people could make money as studio musicians, which I was one of them, because you couldn't make a record or even a demo or do a jingle or anything unless you booked a studio.
Right.
And you couldn't have your music played unless you booked musicians, or unless you were a band. So that was our livelihood, and that's the way things went. And it was all great for a long, long time. And then suddenly, home studios popped up. Well, that's cool. That wasn't that big of a hit just yet, but it gave people that were able to the ability to record everything themselves. It started with people like Stevie Wonder and Todd Rundgren and the like, and Paul McCartney.
Sure.
People that could do that, who could legitimately play a lot of instruments,
right?
Or like Tom Schultz, from Boston. So those people were known for they did everything themselves.
Yeah.
That was cool, but it was still a novelty,
right?
But over time, that became more and more common, where people save money by recording everything themselves, right? Of course, why not? And then, but the thing that really changed was when we were able to use MIDI instruments and samplers and computers and sequencers and DAWs, which we use now. When that started becoming more and more commonplace, it wasn't unusual then for like a TV show, instead of having, a stable of musicians that came in and did the show every week for the composer probably played just about everything. A lot of composers play piano or keyboards, so they could play, a Lindrum part, and they could play, a sampled bass part. They could play, a sampled, horn maybe. Things like guitar and stuff were really hard to do with samples. So guitarists still worked a lot, but bass players and drummers immediately felt the impact of that when sequencers and samplers and MIDI instruments became more and more commonplace.
Yeah.
Less and less work started showing up, especially in things like jingles and TV shows, because it wasn't so critical, It wasn't really happening. It wasn't impacting record dates yet, because you wouldn't go in and make a record with MIDI instruments, right?
Sure.
But you certainly could do a Wrigley gum commercial with one.
Yeah. And it's probably the workflow is faster too, because you don't have to wrangle 4 or 5 guys. Well,
not necessarily. That was a little argument that people had, because if one person was doing it, it took one person to do all that stuff a lot longer than it took to have 5 musicians play it at once.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So there was that aspect of it, but still, bottom line is the bottom line, where they could save money. And, if it's a TV production company and say, hey man, we could do this commercial for like $5,000 with just using the composer, or we can do it for $15,000 using the studio and musicians. That was a no-brainer for them.
Sure.
So that's what changed. That's how everything it impacted everybody. And we suddenly found ourselves in a position where we had to kind of be creative and figure out, well, what else can we do?
At this time, how many dates were union, and what was the union's response to that?
Oh, okay. Well, all the industrial stuff, as I like to call it, that was union.
Yeah.
All of it. I'd say 90% of it, you know. And the union really, discouraged playing what they called dark dates, non-union dates. And I was actually an advocate, I got involved in it because I saw the value of the union, for what kind of work that I was doing.
Yeah.
I was getting paid a reasonable fee. I was also putting money into my own retirement, and I was getting health insurance,
Yeah.
And I was getting residuals.
Yeah.
So if you worked on a TV show, it was a union date, and that TV show, like say it was a Friends, which I played on some of that stuff, or, you could still see money, you'd see money for years afterwards here and there.
Yeah.
If it got sold to some syndicated thing, or it got sent to Europe or South America, or, Japan.
Yeah, that's a different rage, but yeah, you're still getting money off. Yeah.
Yeah. And which is fair,
Yeah.
Record dates, hardly any were union.
Okay.
That was always negotiated money. It would be like, hey, you want to do this Stevie Nicks record, she'll pay you $5,000.
Yeah.
It'll
just
take
a buyout.
It'll take you 4 days, whatever,
Sure.
we think. And if it goes longer, you know what I mean? They would negotiate.
Yeah.
And live work and touring also was non-union, but TV shows, feature films, jingles, that stuff was all of it.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I got here, like the union didn't have too much grasp on too many things. A lot of just the TV stuff, any sideline stuff, and mainly just movies dates. Because coming from Arizona, even before I left Arizona, a lot of television shows and production companies were going to Arizona to dodge the LA union.
Yeah, they did.
So they were using a lot of Phoenix guys for a lot of the television shows to just sidestep the whole situation.
That happened. That always happened here and there over the years. Like you would hear stories about, so-and-so, a composer went to Budapest, to record the orchestra for this movie, or they went to Toronto.
Right.
Even because, they could get a good orchestra up there and it would be cheaper.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because to record an orchestra in LA was an expensive endeavor, obviously, But these are the days of big movie budgets, and the music budget was a pittance compared to the rest of the movie budget. So nobody really complained about it. But, the smaller budget movies, smaller companies, independents, things like that, they were always looking for ways to skirt around paying the union fees.
Right.
I get it. At the same time, and all musicians, when the cupboard's getting a little bare, you just got to work.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Right.
What are you going to do?
Right.
Can't starve. But I was an advocate for union stuff. I thought it was useful. I thought it was important, and I thought it was definitely a good thing for most circumstances when there was like corporate money, especially behind behind a project, whether it's a record company or not. Record companies though would never, they wouldn't. They just wouldn't pay union, Wasn't they didn't have the money, but they wouldn't. But then again, but if you did a record that had an orchestra on it, and I produced a lot of these records too, like like a John Tesh, does this, the hits with the something symphony orchestra. And I would, I'd have to book the sessions, and, that was all union stuff. It had to be, because you couldn't get the players you wanted.
Right. Outside of the union.
Yeah. They wouldn't do a non-union date, not an orchestra date.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rhythm sections are they were like a different animal, Yeah.
Because you could track the rhythm section somewhere else.
Yeah, but just rhythm section players were more apt to because they were like the cooler guy. Forgive me, the string players not cool, but they were like the kind of the yo cats, they used to call them. They'll come in, pay so and so $1,000 for a day, and he'll come and play. Sure,
exactly. Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
no, it's fascinating. I like hearing about all that stuff. Did you ever get into composing?
I did, yeah. I wrote for a few films, and a few jingles here and there. Probably some of the worst movies ever made, but I wrote the music for them. So,
man, the first one I was going to ask if you did Hollow Man with Kevin Bacon, only because I hate that movie.
No, but I am in a Kevin Bacon movie though.
Really?
Yeah. I got Christopher Guest, the guy that did Spinal Tap, and Mike McKeon, those two guys. They made a movie. Well, Christopher Guest, this was his first movie that he like produced and directed and budgeted and everything. It was called The Big Picture.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up right now, actually.
Yeah, and so it's him and Mike McKeon and Terry Hatcher, and Kevin Bacon and Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Okay.
So
definitely an all-star cast. An ensemble cast. On
the recording session for the music, we recorded this song that he and Michael McKeon were singing, which was kind of like a Spinal Tap session, Chris and Michael said, "Hey, you guys want to be in the movie?" Saying to us, the guys that were on the date.
Yeah.
That was Mike Miller and Mike Jokum and Novi, the violist, and getting somebody, Martin Lund. They said, "Listen, we'll pay you a little something. It'd be great to have you." So we're actually in the movie, and we play a band called the Pez People, and they had us dressed up in Pez dispensers. Yeah. So this is what you get for recording a session for Mike McKeon and Chris Guest. But it was awesome, and we got to play. And so I got to be in a couple scenes with Kevin Bacon. So we, I like to say to my friends, if you're not already within 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, you are now.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
One of my first gigs in LA was opening up for the Bacon Brothers.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that was the Canyon Club. Yeah, they were fun.
Yeah.
Cool. I had blues rock kind of a thing.
At the Canyon Club in Agora or the one in Santa Clarita?
No, Agora.
Yeah. That's awesome.
It was cool.
Yeah, Kevin's a cool guy. Yeah. I haven't seen him much since then, but he was fun to be with. And so was Christopher Guest, for that matter. That was a long, long time ago, but they were cool.
Yeah.
But I wrote for a movie called Spirits, and I wrote for another one called something about love. Sex. talking about sex.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Spirits was just Spirits? That's just the name of
Spirits,
the film?
yeah. And there was another one talking about sex with this, it was one of the Wyans sister. She was in it. Kim Wyans. Yeah. And a couple other movies. One called The Poet, another one called The Other End of the Line. So, I did a little bit of film writing here and there, and I discovered soon that it's a whole other ball of wax. I mean, trying to get work as a film composer, it's incredibly tight. There's a reason why the people that do it so well because they are geniuses. I mean, it's a really, really, really hard medium, to be successful at. And the hours are insane. Because everyone knows, the last thing they do in a movie, especially in a big feature film, is the music. Right. Before they mix it, it's the music's the last thing. And it's always, and a lot of times, they're hoping the music's going to save the picture or a few scenes at least.
Yeah. Right.
So it's super high pressure.
Yeah. How did you feel about the process of it, of writing to picture and all that? Did you enjoy the creativity aspect?
I did.
Of composing? Just everything that goes with it is taxing?
I read the Elmer Bernstein book called, I think it's called On the Track or On the Right Track or something. And it's a book about film composing, and it covers everything, not just the technical aspects about how to how to time out a scene and stuff, but also about, how to write for scene, how to work with directors. And it's a really great book for anyone that's interested in film composing. So I went through that, and even the first film I wrote for, I did a lot of it myself, but I did hire musicians too, because it was, very low budget.
Yeah.
But I wrote everything out, I wrote the entire score out. I didn't I acted as if I was going to present this to, an orchestra. So, because I wanted to kind of train myself to write, properly. I didn't want to I can just play this scene, and that works, and kind of just budget, I timed everything out. And there used to be a program on the Mac called CUE, that would do the math for you. So once you put in, so you put in like your SMPTE time stuff, you'd say, well, the scene starts here and I have a hit here at this, at 1 hour, 22 seconds and frames. Yeah. And then, it ends here. You could put that in and it would like tell you, okay, well, you can do it at this tempo and the hit would happen at bar 23, beat 4.
Okay.
That kind of thing. And you could write around using those time,
timestamps
references.
Yeah.
Even like it would help you do things like if you needed to like have a retard, or like a slow tempo changes, you could put that in. It was a cool program. It doesn't exist anymore, this program, but it was very cool. Yeah. Because now, when you use like a program like Digital Performer, you can do that within the DAW,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Tempo, especially with tempo changes and stuff. But back then it was a separate thing and it would just basically print out like, okay, well, here's your map, tempo map, at whatever tempo you're doing. You could like input the tempo and you'd have to put in your frames and stuff. And it was kind of archaic, but it worked.
I mean, it seems like the more archaic version would be having a conductor watch the film in real time and, changing the whole nature of the group in real time.
Yeah. That's right. That's the way they always did it, right?
Yeah.
They would use the thing called a click book, and that's how they timed out their stuff. Because, if you look on the reels, when they would be doing when you'd be on a sound stage recording to a film, there would be the flashing dots, that would tell the conductor when it's coming in and out, of a scene. And that's like, you're definitely doing it, by feel, know. You get the tempo, right? You get your tempo set up, but you could still be off by, a few seconds, right?
Right. And it would, any push and pull, depending on interpretation of the film or where you want the, a crescendo in the music to be a dramatic piece. Yeah.
Especially if you have very specific hits.
Yeah.
So they'd be watching it. You could see it like, when you're playing on these dates and you can see them conducting, all of a sudden you're coming up to a hit and they might even like just kind of like slow it down just for half a bar, just to get it,
Yeah.
And then also they would, at the end of it too, they would listen to it and go, we can move this a little bit and kind of match that. So it was the system and the process behind it was pretty complex and pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That they did this all those years,
Yeah. What have you been working on? What have you been working on lately? Is there any projects in the works or any records you're working on? Or
let me see. I did a couple of records. I did a record for a guitarist, a really good guitarist named John Philbrick.
Okay.
And he's kind of like a Bonamassa kind of guy, he's really, really good young guy. There's a bunch of people on it. Greg Bissonette played drums in a couple tracks, and let's see who else is can't think of anybody. I did a record for a band called Secret Sky. They're a British-Canadian kind of world music band, really cool stuff.
Okay.
Tal Bergman was on drums in that one.
Sweet.
Let's see. Well, I just got off the road with Billy, so, with Cobham, so that's where I was for the last couple of months. So
Right. You're just kind of chilling out and reacclimating.
Yeah, and now, it's holidays, so there's not much going on, which is fine, with me. And I did that gig with Alan Hines and Brad Rebuchin at Baked Potato, which was fun.
Yeah, that was a fun band. It was great to hear everybody play together. I hadn't heard. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen Alan live, and then I'd known Brad for a while.
Oh, good.
Good to hear him play again.
Brad, I love Brad.
Yeah,
and Chris Wawick is really fun to play with.
He is.
He's so different.
Yeah, I know. You never know where he's gonna go with it.
Yeah, and
he always keeps me on the edge of my seat.
I kept throwing stuff at him,
Yeah.
Just because he's cool.
Yeah.
So, like I remember there's one tune we played towards the end of the night. I'm thinking I'm going to put like a Senegalese kind of, groove on this thing, like a little African thing. And he was like, man, right?
Yeah. Which one was that? I remember the tune.
Yeah. It was Footprints. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was, man, it was awesome.
Yeah.
What he did. Like, because everybody plays Footprints, like the same,
Right.
Every once in a while, if somebody play it like in a 6/8 feel, but I'm like, man, let's mix it up,
Yeah. No, that was really cool.
Plus, it's the potato, You can
get away with whatever you'd like. The potato.
Yeah. So that was fun. But that's about it. Christmas. Sorry, Thanksgiving coming up and Christmas. I got to get back and do my writing. I was doing a lot of writing, and during the pandemic and stuff, and I was planned on recording a lot of stuff, and I just made my demos, and I never did anything with it. So I got to kind of get back on that.
This is your own personal project?
Yeah, because I've never recorded a record or any kind of thing. I've never released anything, and I have a bunch of tunes, and I figured, well, may as well do something.
What's kind of the vein? Is it kind of the fusion-y stuff?
It's instrumental. That's a good question. I don't know how to categorize it outside of it being it's bass oriented, but not a lot of bass solos. There's some solos,
Okay.
But it's it's kind of I guess fusion is one way to describe it, but it's not like
Return to Forever
kind of fusion. Maybe a little bit more Weather Report meets.
That's the fusion I like. Yeah, Weather Fusion Steps Ahead. I really like Steps Ahead.
Yeah, meets maybe Snarky Puppy.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just tunes, good tunes. I hope.
Cool.
By the way, what is that bass back there I'm looking at? What is that?
This one?
Is that a Lakeland? No.
That's Dan's new company, D. Laken.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's the one him and I co-designed together. That's the signature.
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 5-string fretless. It's a lot of fun.
Ooh, look at that.
Howard Yates did the custom pickup for it.
Wow, man, that's gorgeous.
Got a bunch of little tricks on here.
Yeah, so what's going on with everything there? Volume,
good question.
volume
EQ, bass, treble, mid bass.
Right.
This is a passive, so it's active passive. That's a tone control for when it's in passive mode.
Okay.
This is a mid frequency selector.
Yeah.
And then this splits the coil.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty versatile. I checked out these nylon strings because a friend of mine, I was like, dude, you gotta check them out. You check them out.
You know what's funny, Ryan? I just happen to have this bass here. Can you see this?
Yeah, what is that?
So this was one of my early Tim Landers, the TL-5s that we did with Peavey.
Okay.
And what's unique about it was this was an early active passive switch. Where basses didn't really have that. That was one of my ideas back then was
oh, really?
Because on all the active instruments, they were either, active instruments or passive.
Yeah.
But the problem with them was when the battery would go in those days, as soon as the voltage would drop just enough, the bass would just stop working. Right? Yeah.
And you'd get that kind of distorted hum thing?
Well, no, it would just be
just out.
Soundless, Okay. So you would get stuck on stage.
Yeah.
Unless you had a backup.
Right. Yeah.
So the first thing I did, I said, listen, man, you got to put an active passive switch in it. So this is a prototype.
Okay.
So this goes way back. This is late 89, maybe.
Yeah. The neck reminds me of the inlays remind me of the old Yamaha BB series.
Yeah. It says TL-5 on it. But so we did a lot of stuff. I mean, even the headstock, I had them change and
okay.
And the body shape.
Yeah.
And
my first bass was a Peavey.
Really? Which one did you have? TL-40?
The P bass, just the Fury.
Oh, yeah.
Like
so
the
this
cheap
was
entry level P bass.
So this was the beginning of my signature with them, but it happened to have that active passive.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was good.
And then, man, I don't know if I've ever played a bass from that era, an active bass. It'd be interesting to see, what the preamps were like and how technology has advanced.
I could tell you. Because I designed it. But so what happened was, I had worked on a bass with Mike Pedulla, the Buzz bass. That was me and Mike and Mark Egan.
Yeah.
And then I also worked on a bass with Yamaha, which was the 1600S, I think, which ended up being one of the BB 5000.
Okay.
And then, Peavey approached me and said, can we make a bass together? I said, yeah. And I said, but I want complete control over it. So I had this idea, and I wanted a 3-band EQ on board, a little bit. This came from the influence from the Ken Smith bass that I played back in New York in the early 80s. So everything was going along fine, and we had really good people on it. This guy named Mike Powers, the head engineer over there, and so I got the woods I wanted. They got the body shape exactly right. I mean, everything was working great. When it came time for the onboard preamp, Hartley, the owner of Peavey, decided he wanted us to use they already had a circuit board they used in one of their mixing consoles. He wanted that to be because he didn't want to have to spend more money engineering and tooling up for a new preamp.
Right.
So we kind of had to go with it, and we tried modifying, but it, the early ones, they were kind of noisy. It worked, but like there wasn't enough control over it, and the EQ points, I didn't like where they were. Frequency points, I didn't like where they were. Kind of had to go with it.
Right.
Eventually, after a couple of years, I did get what I wanted.
Were the frequency points pretty stock, like 500 for the mids, 1K for the treble, like 60 or 80 for the bass? Or those always seem to be the low. All right, somewhere between 60 and 80.
It was like 2K for the treble. I remember that. Yeah. And the mid range was, I think,
probably 250 or 5.
1.2, and then the bass was like 800. Or
something. Oh wow, that's all pretty high.
Or 500.
Yeah. Those are all pretty high.
It wasn't right.
There's no bass in any of those frequencies.
I mean, the bass was 300.
Okay.
I could be wrong on all of those, but it wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to be able to vary the mid-range frequency.
Yeah.
And they couldn't do that at first, but we did finally get it on the circuit board. You actually had to go and do it internally.
Okay.
But you could do it. That was the first improvement. And then eventually the preamp became more of what I wanted. Never ultimately was what I wanted all the way, but and the bass ran for I think about 9 years or so. Before they discontinued it and started with the Cirrus.
Okay,
which is basically my bass.
I remember when that hit. Yeah.
So the Cirrus is basically my bass with the improvements that I wanted, and hardly not having to pay my royalties. So,
I had the after the Fury, I had the Accelerator, which was an active bass.
I had one of those, yeah.
Yeah, and I man, that was so long ago.
I like that. It had a long scale, too. It had a 35 scale.
Yeah, so I originally got the fretless version. I had been playing a few years, and I wanted to try that out. And then I was just, like Steubenhaus said, I wasn't ready for that yet.
Yeah.
So I went back and got the fretted version of the same bass.
Yeah.
And I seem to remember that having a stacked knob where you could select the mid frequency and then it would boost or cut.
Right.
And I really liked that about that bass. And that kind of spoiled me on parametric mids and sweepable mids still to this day. Like having full control over the mids is something really important to me because of that bass.
That was key. That was what I wanted from the beginning. And interestingly, going full circle, that goes back to my first bass preamp, which I had when I first moved to LA, and I wanted to be hip like everybody else. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get the Olympic preamp, but I bought a Furman preamp. And a Furman, what they had was they were known for their parametric EQ.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I learned to use that. And it's a great way, to be able to, to really mold your sound. So what I wanted was that sweepable parametric style mid-range EQ at least, on the preamp. And
yeah.
So
the Potato, where you had the Lakeland 5. Was that an Osborne or a Daryl Jones? It didn't look like a Daryl Jones because Daryl's has a different body shape.
It's the 5560, I think they call it.
Okay.
Which is basically their passive 5-string jazz bass.
Yeah. Okay.
With those hand wound pickups though that they make there. What I liked about it mostly was I wanted the 35-inch scale for the B string, and I wanted those pickups, those hand wound pickups. And
those are the Lakelands.
Passive. Yeah, the Lakelands.
Yeah.
And so I just used like a Sans amp. I actually for that night I had the what's that called? The bass fly rig, You know, for the Tech 21 thing?
No.
It's an analog like floor strip. It's only about this big.
Okay.
And it's got a little compressor and level thing on it, and it's got the compressor, by the way, is really super sensitive, but it works. Yeah. And then it's got its Sans amp built into it.
Okay.
And it's got two different amp models. So one of them is more like kind of like an SWR thing, and the other one's like an Ampeg, right?
Yeah.
But it has the 3-band EQ on it.
Okay.
And it also has an octave filter thing, which is not really an octave generator, but but it's kind of cool. So it's all analog. What I liked about it was this is just one little thing that you can kind of put in your gig bag, and it's got a really, really sweet analog chorus. Really nice analog chorus.
Nice.
The thing is killer.
Yeah.
So that's what I was using, but using the EQ on the SansAmp thing for when I wanted something, a little different.
Mm-hmm.
But that Lake, I really like that Lakeland. It's so like, there's really not. It's just got a great neck and that extra scale length for the B string. I always like that. So other than that, it's like a Fender.
It's pretty. I have a Lakeland over here that's I like because it's really versatile. It's just kind of a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
Bass. Like I can cover a lot of ground on it, and it
They're
always
really
will
good.
get the job done.
They make good instruments. I mean, I am in between endorsements now because Mike Pedulla retired.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he actually a few years ago before the pandemic. And so I've been trying to play all kinds of stuff, and like I went back to my Fenders and playing a lot of Fenders. Like on Billy's tour, I was playing just the 4-string jazz bass, like a 62 reissue.
Okay.
And my original, one of my older Pedulla, that fretless that I had at the Big Potato, that's an old 85, I think.
Okay.
Buzz bass.
Those had a specific fretless sound. I used to really love only the Pedulla fretlesses. Like
that bass is killer, man.
What were the fretted ones? The Thunder Buzz, or was that the fretless?
He had the
Buzz.
They had the Thunderbolt, the Thunder.
Thunderbolt, yeah.
And the Thunderbolt was obviously the bolt on. The Thunder was the neck through, and then the I had a Thunderbolt, and I worked on them with the Nuance. That was the last one that I worked on with Mike, which was a bolt on, kind of nice boutique-y sounding 5-string, with a really great. I don't know what he did to the pickups, but they were kind of soap bar pickups, but they were just really sweet. And it wasn't perfect for everything. It was really good if you wanted that boutique kind of sound,
Yeah, kind of a boutique-y hi-fi Bartolini.
Yeah, but because of the bolt on, it had a little bit more punch.
To it. I just loved the fretlesses. And I was kind of into Mark Egan back then.
How that started was I had a 64 jazz bass that I loved. It was white. It was Olympic white with a matching headstock.
Yeah.
I don't have it anymore. I won't tell you why, because I'm an idiot, but I'll just leave it at that. But back then, I really got into Jocko, and I wanted it defretted, So I heard that there was a guitar guy, not too far from where I lived, and his name was Mike Pedulla. He had a company called Pedulla Orsini, and they made acoustic guitars. But he also kind of sidelined doing fret work for other people. So I called him. I said, "Hey, can you do fret work on a bass?" He said, "Yeah."
Is this back in Boston or New York?
This is back in Boston.
Okay.
So I took it over to him, and I said, "What I want you to do is I want you to pull the frets on this. Put some wood putty in the lines, and then cover it with boat epoxy. And then sand it down." He goes, "Are you kidding?" I said, "No, this is what I want. This guy Jocko, this is what he did." Because I asked Jocko what he told me that. Yeah. He says wood putty and marine epoxy.
Yeah. Okay,
so Mike took the bass and he called me a couple of days later. He says, "Okay, well, I found something a little better to put in the fret lines. I got this really cool little like white stuff and it looks neater than the wood putty." And he goes, "And I also found a better epoxy. It's a bowling alley epoxy." And he goes, "And it's nice and clear, and you can see the beautiful grain on that rosewood." I said, "Great." So he did that. So I picked up the bass, about a week later or so. And I started playing it around town, and everybody was like, "Man, who did that work?" They loved it, including Mark Egan and and then eventually people like Victor Bailey, and everybody would want to play my bass. Everyone would come see me play, not to see me play, but they wanted to sit in and play my bass.
Right.
So
perfect.
So Pedulla started getting all these orders. Everybody started sending their basses to him, to defret them, and do a fretless job. And eventually, including Mark Egan. So Mark Egan's bass that's on, those the Papathini band stuff is like, that's Mike Pedulla's work. So So he goes, man, I'm going to start making basses. He was getting so much work. Like he said, if I make a bass, will you play it? I said, yeah. So he made me this all rosewood bass.
Okay.
When I was playing with LD Meola. So I wanted it kind of looking a little bit Olympic style,
Yeah.
So that's where the first Pedulla body shape came from, was his version of an Olympic.
Is that the shape with like the kind of big round beehive and then like kind of the skinnier top horn?
It's like the Buzz bass thing, like that kind of just rounded, bout, and then like, the horns, right?
Right.
And then he moved the bridge up a little bit in the body, and the neck stuck out a little bit, because that's what I thought Olympics did,
Yeah. Those always feel really long.
I was just a big Stanley Clark fan, and this is what I wanted. And he put these gigantic humbuckers on it, these DiMarzio. So that was the very first Pedulla bass, all rosewood with an ebony fingerboard, gigantic humbuckers, with like kind of looking like an Olympic a little bit.
Yeah.
And it was actually a Pedulla Orsini. He was still with Sam Orsini, but they were still partners. So that was the very first Pedulla bass, and I started playing that. And then he said, I'm going to make a fretless version of it. And that was the first Buzz bass. And I still have that.
The bowling alley
That
epoxy?
was with the bowling alley epoxy. Eventually, he moved to another kind of polyurethane thing, but...
Yeah, I remember the feel of them, and like whatever he was using for coating, maybe... I don't know, early 90s, no, mid 90s, definitely mid 90s. It was different, and it had a different sound, and I loved it. Yeah, but I never knew what it was or researched
Super
it.
hard surface.
Yeah,
super hard surface like that. The finish, the neck finish on that Buzz bass I was playing last Monday was is the original. Nothing's changed on that bass. Nothing.
Oh wow,
that bass is like 25. Well, how old is it? 36 years old, 37 years amazing. Old. Yeah. And it's on all those, a lot of the records I talked about. It's that bass.
Yeah.
I played that bass for ages, and it looks like it, It's
do you have it insured?
Oh yeah, sure I do.
Yeah. Good. Good. I mean, it's
no.
Yeah. I'm terrible with gear insurance.
I know. So. Anyway, but it's a great bass. He was. I love Mike Pedulla. Not only a great luthier, but really super. I don't know if you ever met him, but he was a really incredibly nice guy.
I remember Wabbich was going to do this kind of like bass day thing down in Tustin a few years ago.
Yeah.
At this house, he was kind of like doing some booking for and stuff, and he was going to get Mark Egan to come out and kind of do like a little around NAMM time, like this little Pedulla. Kind of thing, but I don't think that didn't ever end up happening, and I never met Egan or the
Mark's killer. He's a great guy. He's from my hometown, from Brockton. Mark.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was a trumpet player when he was a young guy in school, and then he went to Miami and started playing more bass. But yeah, it's funny that we're both from like the same town. And you know who's also from right next door to us, from Foxborough, is Tim Lefebvre.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We're all like South Shore bass players.
Yeah, that's there's
a thing, man. There's some water going on down there. Yeah. To be drinking. But anyway,
cool.
Yeah. So okay, but did I give you way too much info or what?
Man, this is great. This has been great.
All right.
Man,
this has been fun, man.
Man, it's an absolute pleasure. Anything, if anything ever you want to talk about, or you got some news, or you're going on the road or want to talk about, or hit me up. Let's do it again.
All right. Sounds good, Ryan.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tim.
All right, man. Good seeing you.
Thanks, man.
All right.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
All right, so that was my talk with session bassist Tim Landers. I dug the insight about the session scene and how that influenced bass construction. Like, I love the history of it all, and it was an honor to have Tim on to hear it from him because he was there. He was a cat helping these manufacturers get it together to facilitate the basses that the job required. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I really liked I asked Jocko about the epoxy, and then when he went back to Pedulla. That's great. I love that story. All right, folks. That's all I have for this one. I'm going to sign off. Thanks as always for listening, and I will catch you on the next one in a minute.